afternoon, everyone, and welcome for the session on mobilizing your community. And the full title is Mobilizing Your Community to Become a Strong Town. But as I'll touch on this afternoon, my core goal is to share the different types of things that as we engage with communities all across North America, to engage with the question of what does it take to bring about change in a community? There are many different methods, many different ways to do that, some using pitchforks and others that use more gentle means. And yet one of the key things that we want to work at is how do we find ways together as community members to mobilize our community together. And so my name is Eeden Petersman. I'm the Director of Membership and Development at Strong Towns. I'm also get to be the member advocate for Strong Towns, which in my role means working not only with our 5,200 members of Strong Towns, but also engaging with people that are interested in what we're doing, have learned from different, member of council or other folks in city building professions. For others, it's just, hey, I've been reading your stuff, I'm interested in what's happening, or I've got challenging questions that I want to put to you, and taking the time to engage with them on those things. I'm also practicing right now this work of trying to mobilize our community for change in Delta, British Columbia, which is where I live currently, suburb of Vancouver. And in that city, I'm helping to lead a local group that is pushing for more housing and better land use within our city. It's been a remarkable opportunity for us to engage seniors and high schoolers and everybody in between with the question of how do we build a place that is able to provide a good life in a prospering place for members of our community. And so in about an hour, or hopefully about 45 minutes, I want to take with you to be able to outline just the different key features of successfully organizing groups and emerging groups in our communities, and to touch on why that matters and what are some of these common pillars that we see in these places. Well, I want to begin with the idea of time travel, which maybe is a curious way to begin a talk like this. But when you think of time travel, if you've ever spent any time reading sci-fi, one of the rules of time travel is you should be really, really careful about the things that you change. Because a change that's done 400 years prior could mean that you don't get born because your parents never met, because the war between two nations didn't happen and didn't result in an upheaval and a migration, or many other fanciful schemes that we realize how contingent our lives are. And so I was chatting with a city manager in Selkirk, Manitoba, Dwayne Nichols, his name, and he said, every day that I show up as a city manager, I actually take the different approach. He said, if I was a time traveler, I would be careful not to make too many changes. But he said, but the significance of what I'm doing currently is that every time I make a small change, every time I take a small step as part of my community, I am potentially setting up an incredible opportunity decades or generations from now. And that, to me, is part of the mindset that each of us can have as we grapple with some incredibly pressing, overlapping, mutually reinforcing problems that we face in our communities. Every new member session that we run with our local conversation leaders, as well as with members of Strong Towns, I always ask, what is the problem that you feel compelled to address in your community? And I ask it in the singular, but it's always plural. There's this challenge, and this challenge. And one of the things that you'll have heard in our time of engaging with the community as the part of the Strong Towns engagement is that there is no silver bullet, there is no single solution. And along with that, that one of the things that we have to grapple with is the fact that we are in a series of overlapping predicaments with outcomes that can be either considerably worse or somewhat better. Now, the challenge is that in my generation, I'm faced with challenge or needs and burdens and problems that have been emerging from previous generations. And I know that I also have a responsibility, as well as members of my community, to try to address the problems that are here in this time, much like a time traveler stepping back into this day and saying, what is the small thing that I can do that may have a significant impact? Strong Towns takes a decidedly dim view of big bets, of speculative, massive investments. There's a brand new, we were just up in Calgary, a lot of controversy over how much money they need to spend to build another Saddle Dome or a version to replace it. And a lot of the big money behind that project is saying we need this because then we will be rich. and we'll have no more problems, and we'll keep our team, which as a Flames fan, I'm all for that. But as a citizen, as somebody participating in a place, I made the joke that I will come and gladly attend a game in their city, but I will not be the one paying for the impacts that it will have on their community over the long period, investing almost $1 billion in a project that will have a real challenge to recoup that level of investment compared with the alternatives if $1 billion were spent in many small bets, many smaller projects along the way. And so, as Dwayne Nickel pointed out, as a city manager, but really this affects every one of us, if we think, what if we were the time traveler showing up today? There are small things that we can be doing, and these are the things that can have a significant impact in our communities. Even at the household level, being a good neighbor is a little thing that can have a lasting impact on a child next door, that can have a lasting impact on just the well-being of a senior that lives near you, that can have a lasting impact on your own family as they come and spend time in your place that you have taken care of, that you have been a guardian of in this place. And so I love this idea of when boring is a thrill, rather than always wanting the bright, the glamorous, the flashy, instead saying, how do we fix? How do we repair? How do we rehabilitate? And this is a key part of what it means from the Strong Towns perspective to be a strong town. You could take the trademark, we haven't trademarked strong towns, but you could take the asterisks off it and just, what does it take to be a town that is strong or a place that is resilient? And it's going to involve citizens like you and me participating in our community, helping it to grow. And so today, I want to provide this as the fruits of our learning. I said that I've been leading a local conversation group in my city. I've also been a pastor for 10 years. I've also worked in mayor's offices. I've worked in the federal government. And so those are some of my experiences that I can draw upon in terms of connecting people and encouraging people, mobilizing people to take small actions in their community. But another part of it is also learning from what we're seeing in many places, including what we're seeing in Medicine Hat. And so if you want more information on the latter part, what does it mean to become a strong town? We've been trying to provide a lot of different layouts of ways for people to encounter what it means to become a strong town. There's a course that you can take on the Medicine Hat Academy, or you can take the Strong Towns 101 course at academy.strongtowns.org. Again, those both are free resources, fully available. You can take this at your own time, at your own leisure, in your own living room, on your own couch if you wish, and just be able to have that as a resource to learn, especially on what it is to be a strong town. But I want to focus especially on the emphasis on mobilizing your community. One of the challenges that a lot of communities face is apathy. Another challenge is the perception that things are happening that are beyond your control. Another challenge that many people feel is that they feel disempowered to participate in the process because, for one, the only time for public comment happens when they need to be putting children down to bed, or it happens during working hours, which admittedly, this session is happening during working hours, but we are recording it. We're doing our best to try to do evening events as well as daytime events, trying to provide ways for people to be engaged in this process. But along the way, there are many things that we as strong towns have come in to try to help, to cultivate, to encourage in the community. We held meetups here in July when we came. This is a picture from being at the yard together. And one of the questions was, well, we could have done this ourselves as Medicine Hatters. And the answer, or the question I had said was, have you been doing this on a regular basis? Is this happening? And is there maybe now an added impetus, an added encouragement to continue to do these things? And so this is our talk today is where do we start in this process? Much like our questions around public investment, much like our questions about the processes needed to build a healthy, robust housing market, a housing economy to create great opportunities for small businesses, we actually think that when we think of the softer work of building a great, strong community, much of that work has to start at the bottom. Much of that work begins with key citizens taking action and interest in their place, and then working in increments. Those that know our community's needs and resources better than anyone else. And I trust that that's, in many respects, you, depending on your duration within the city, but also your observation of the city. I actually have resolved to never use in public comments. I'm not saying that no one else can do this, but I've resolved never to say how long I've lived in my city of Delta. Because in certain respects, it does matter, because you've had more opportunity if you've lived a long time to be able to observe what's taking place, to be able to notice different things about the community. But there's another critical aspect of this is why children are so wonderful to be around. They will notice things that as adults we sometimes don't realize. This is the whole fable of the emperor's new clothes. This is the introduction of new voices and new insights into what it takes to build a stronger community. And when we become welcoming of that, it's a wonderful thing, so that together we see a greater number of people that say, we know our community's needs and resources better than anyone else. And so what does it mean to build by increments? If I'm laying out the idea that we can do through many small bets, through lots of hands being involved in this process, through the formation of small little groups that then begin to grow and to multiply within the community and build greater capacity within the community, which again, already exists, but I have deep confidence that even more can. Your turnout in your most recent municipal election was very normal, which means very low, which means very real challenge to not see the same level of activity, the same level of people saying the stakes are as high or higher for our local election as they are for national elections, for provincial elections, or even for American elections that we as Canadians aren't even involved in, and yet we pay close attention to. And so in this context, we want to say, how do we bring the focus often to the things that we can do each week, each day, to take these types of incremental steps to help our place? And these increments are steps along the way towards your goal, to build capacity, again, without exorbitant risk. Distributing your bets, making many small bets, or if you don't like the language of betting, to make many little investments. Be able to try it out. One of the things my parents encouraged me to do as a kid, and I did this, is I tracked in the Lethbridge Herald every week a certain number of stocks. And it was as if I had invested in them. And I actually wish I had, because I would be much richer than I currently am. But part of my task was just watching and seeing. And one of the things my dad said was, make sure that you spread out your imaginary portfolio over many different things. And I learned an early lesson in that if one of my stocks was suddenly up a bit, I thought, I wish I had a lot more in there. But most of the time, there'd be a sudden drop, and it'd be like, I'm glad I only had a few in there. And we apply that also to the way that we build our communities and guard against the things at times that are very risky investments. We have one city that we have been critical of called Carmel, Indiana, where they've invested over $1 billion that they have borrowed in order to build wonderful facilities. And they're all paid for through future revenues. And so the model says there will always be continued revenue coming to our community from this investment. But that's not the same thing as it being paid for. That means it's been borrowed for. And that means it requires that the state of Carmel, Indiana, or the city of Carmel, Indiana, never go into a period of decline, never find that its convention center after 20 years is not quite as nice as it used to be, or in Calgary, the Saddle Dome is not quite as good as it used to be in the 80s when it was constructed, and now, in order to be at the modern standard, needs to be replaced. And these projects are often done with a bold assertion of big returns, and yet the reality is sometimes those returns don't come. And what happens when a big bet fails is there's a much bigger amount of harm compared to many different distributed risks along the way. And so conceptually, what we desire to see more and more community members encouraged to do, and I'm seeing this even in the bringing out of new participants in this process here in Medicine Hat, we can only from the outside see a greater degree of interest and excitement and engagement and enthusiasm that's taking place. You may say, hey, it's actually not, nothing's changed. Certainly from our perspective, we are noticing that things are changing. City staff and others are saying, we're having more engagement. We're seeing more participation in these things. And that's a really strong thing, a really important thing. And to work from the bottom up. And this is where, how you become a strong town. I would say what I'm going to share in what follows is actually guidance, whether you want Medicine Hat to be more like a strong town, or if you're actually not all that pleased with it. If you found in our presentation items that you're disagreeing with, you have this, even in this process, the ability to create groups and movements that help to turn things into the direction that you would wish to go. Going back to that slide, you know what the needs and resources of your community are, and you know what you can do within a community to build up a greater sense of consensus, a greater sense of engagement together. And so, again, as I said before, just one of the core questions I always find really serves as a galvanizing point for our own reflection. This is something you might go for a walk in the coulees and ask yourself, what problem do I feel compelled to address where I live? What's the thing that either keeps you up at night or gives you pause through the day? What are the needs that you see in others? And this is one of the remarkable things about us as humans, is that we're so often interested, yes, in our own experience, but also burdened by the experiences of other people as well. And we want to address their needs, even as we seek for our own basic needs to be met as well. And so, for example, in my community, one of the things that I noticed is that I didn't know my neighbors. I moved our picnic table into the front yard, met a few of them, because all of a sudden I was gardening in the front yard, putting up some beds and doing things like that. Playing in the street with my son meant that we met a few more of them. I thought, oh, we should probably do something. I know that a good neighborhood can often be a host of a great block party. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to do it. 2 years went by, and I thought, I got to do it. So then I drafted a tiny little leaflet and waited. That thing sat in my computer for several weeks until it was getting towards the end of August, and I thought, hit print. Well, now I wasted the paper, or I may as well go and hand them out. So in the middle of a heat wave, handed them out door to door to door. There were 60 households that we invited. We had over 40 people show up for this first block party, and it was the first one in 48 years on our block. Ever since the subdivision had been established, there had never been anything like this. And so my favorite image of it was seeing an elderly couple come walking up the street. They were holding hands, carrying a bit of food and carrying a couple of chairs. And they came up, and here they are standing together. And they said, Morna, she said, I told, his name is blanking on me, Fred. I told Fred, hey, even if you're not going, I'm going. And the result was they both enjoyed it. They both met new people. They both realized they had grandchildren in common in different schools. And the benefit was beautiful. But it also provided a new opportunity for us to talk about some of the behaviors that we were seeing in terms of people blitzing through the street. Oh yeah, there's that Toyota Corolla, like everybody watch out for that one. And we were talking together about some of the things that we could do to continue to look in on Morna and her husband, to be able to take care of the needs of others. Learned of a few people that figured out there was somebody that could watch their dog as a consequence of doing these types of things. And that was sort of the small things. Those were the littlest things. Because one of the things that we have if you go on the Strongtown site, especially if you search for our success stories, they are packed full of people that have done very simple things like this, all the way to like really big things where they're bringing in entirely new community centers to help those that are underprivileged and under-resourced, doing things that are, in a sense, A tier. And I always say start at the D tier, start at the first level, work your way up to those things. And often we become put off by the idea, well, I don't think that I could do that. I don't think that I could organize a citywide festival. Well, where did the citywide festivals come from first? Probably from some kernel of an idea, some opportunity that was nurtured through various small steps like this until it got to the point where not just our block was having a block party. We had a pizza party this past summer, and that was a great opportunity to, again, have a greater group show up for it. And now I'm thinking, all right, we got to do not only a block party, but let's make music. Let's have my brother-in-law and sister-in-law in Winnipeg. They do this really cool front porch music festival where they go from they have 4 different houses in the neighborhood where bands set up and they play on the porch. And these are amateur, like rank amateurs, like they watch a YouTube video on how to play a recorder one night and they're playing for the neighborhood the next day. And yet it's gorgeous, it's wonderful, it's vibrant, it's fun, and it brings people together. And it's a great opportunity to actually just walk within the neighborhood, get to know different people, be like, oh, I didn't even realize you lived in that house. We haven't met before. My name is so-and-so. And so there's so many different things like this. And this is part of the encouragement that we can build stronger communities first just from our houses, from the places that we live, have the privilege of living. And so that's where I say it starts with you. And you need to be a little stubborn, to be impatient at times. Now, be patient broadly. But the idea is, even for me, myself, I realize I'm getting tired of dragging my feet. I should just do it. That type of impatience is the thing that begins to generate a greater opportunity. A certain impatience with oneself to say, maybe again, I can write another little note to the letter or to the newspaper. I can remind my city councilor. I'd love to see them take action on the ability to glean fruit from city-owned trees and to be able to enjoy it without getting a bylaw ticket, which is apparently a thing that is not allowed in the city of Medicine Hat at this point yet. To be at the same time as being impatient to be pushing, because that's a little bit of what it takes to mobilize. You have to be ready to take that action. I would also always, and I'm a preternatural optimist, but I've learned over time that I need to be realistic as well. Don't shoot for the stars and then be frustrated when you don't get there. My son is currently convinced he's the best hockey player since Connor McDavid. And I'm like, buddy, you're not even playing minor hockey at this point, and you're 9. So, you're not going to the NHL. We're not banking our retirement on this happening. We have that realism, and I hate to dash his dreams, and yet I'm reminding him of some of the real parameters that we live in. And I think when we do that, even in the context of how long does change take in a city, in a bureaucracy, within neighborhoods, how many conversations do you need to have with somebody that you disagree with before you get to the point where you understand them and they maybe either begrudgingly or willingly understand you? Are we realistic about that? How many times do you hear somebody say, yeah, so-and-so made a comment and I'm done with them. You're you barely started. Take the opportunity to continue to develop it. And I think this is where we can, each of us, be crafting our own internal sense of realism together with that impatience, as well as drawing on our strengths. We have a young man, he's an engineer and meets all of the criteria for what the caricature of an engineer is. He's bookish, not very outgoing, lovely, smart, brilliant guy. And he said, I'm really struggling to get my local conversation group up and running. And I said, Adam, I want to encourage you to do what you're doing, but also be praying for somebody else to come along and help you. Not to diminish his strengths, but to say you need to play to your strengths, which is the ability to, when somebody enters, that you can instruct them in these things, that you can show them what really is valuable. But at the same time, you're going to need that organizational dynamo to show up. And in the group that I lead, we were sort of moving along. All of a sudden, we had Jessie, a young mom that showed up, and she's got organizing capacity for days. And she's just done wonders to help us to go along with that. And then finally, to be scrappy. And by that I mean to be able to use whatever you have available to you with a little bit of pugnaciousness to say, I'm going to show up even if it's not polished, even if it's not perfect. A lot of people are really fearful to talk to their city councilor because they say, I don't have a level of understanding of these things. I want to be able to bring a deeper understanding of these things. And I say, start with what you know. Sometimes you can ask questions, and that can lead to great opportunities as well. Now, mobilizing your community, I think what I mentioned at the start, apathy is one of the challenges that we face. Another challenge is the sense of discouragement from failure. Discouragement from failure will continue to be relentless in no matter what endeavor you're encountering. My son, when he realizes that his wrist shot is not like Connor McDavid, is going to feel some sense of discouragement. And yet, along the way, he's going to figure out ways as a coping mechanism as well as a growing mechanism to be able to deal with that. In the context of if you have a desire to mobilize your community for change, again, whether you want to become strong towns or whether you want it to become the anarchist capital of Canada or whether you want it to become something wholly other, whatever your vision is, one of the things that we talk about in this great piece that my brother-in-law wrote, What to Do When Your City Won't Listen to Reason, he's speaking of Winnipeg, not Medicine Hat in this context, is he said there's a ladder of engagement. Start with your neighbors. Have the conversation either with your spouse, but you can start also who's your most immediate neighbor or your family members that live with you or your roommates, whomever that might be. But then start with your neighbors. Say, hey, what have you noticed in the city? Or are you worried about, what is the problem that you feel compelled to address? what it does is you immediately have a reason to have that conversation. You live together. You share space together. Your lives are interdependent in various different ways. From that, if you can get a couple of people at your neighbor level that are of interest with you, try something at the block level. Try something at the block level. For me, that was Brad and Francis across the street. We began to have these types of conversations. They were interested in it. We were talking a little bit more, hey, let's use the street again, kind of like in the good old days when their boys would play street hockey in the front yard. It's actually kind of cool. They took the hockey net that had been on our property. Then it was gifted to Brad and Francis when their boys were of age to play hockey because that family was moving away. Now that hockey net has made its way back. And to me, it's an artifact of a community that is looking out for one's needs. And so from that, we said, Brad and Francis, let's host this block party together. And so that's part of engaging at the block level, which can be on activities that are good, bringing people together. But also because of that block party and the things that we were doing was also resulting in opportunities to talk about the problems that we were facing together, the persistent speeders, the cranky dogs, the cranky landlords, or the cranky people, but not just the cranky people, but also, isn't she lovely? And have you ever seen Angelica's backyard? Because her garden is incredible. Those deeper ties that help to build deeper confidence that you live in a place where you are known, where you're valued, where somebody takes interest in the things that you're doing. Then at the block level, you can then say, let's turn this into something we do at the neighborhood level, at the city level, at the region, and at the province or country. This is the ladder of engagement, but what was really appreciated in this article, and I would definitely encourage you to check it out when you have a chance, because I cite it all the time with our groups, all of the different types of engagement that we do, is whenever you encounter a roadblock, no one is listening, or I feel like I'm not getting anywhere, I haven't had a win in a week or a month or even a year in my efforts. I've written 1,500 letters to the editor and only 3 have been published and nothing seems to have been changed. Scale down. Come back down the ladder of engagement and begin at a lower level of intensity, greater level of proximity, which means that you have the greater opportunity to succeed because you've got deeper types of connections, deeper types of relations. This is one of the reasons why neighborhood association presidents or people that are involved in the neighborhood associations often go on to be involved in the city politics, get asked to be on planning commissions, get asked to be on arts commissions and councils and different things like this. They begin this practice and they create something of a winning streak and are encouraged and buoyed by those types of successes. And from that gives rise to greater opportunities that emerge as well. And so if you feel frustrated that the city of Medicine Hat is not listening to you, consider ways that you can engage as a neighborhood. If you feel like your neighborhood is still not really connected and tied together, perhaps make your block the example of what you want to see as a great block, a great place for people to live in your community. And if your block is even difficult, what about if it's just you and your neighbors? A little island of awesome. And from that building out. And I say this in particular because as a millennial, often giving counsel to Gen Zers, as well as my perpetually online boomer friends and others, is that a lot of online discourse really begins to rest hard on the soul, really makes it difficult to communicate across differences. On the one hand, you get to have great connections with people that really agree with you in Canberra, Australia, and in some other part of the world where they happen to be. And yet you become unable to have those conversations at the local level, or you feel like, why isn't anybody else interested in these things? Well, this is where the ladder of engagement says, try that. Find opportunities at the local level to build up this engagement together. And again, when you feel frustrated or you feel like you've hit a ceiling, scale back down, find a project, find a possibility that you could work on together. And so again, this is how you mobilize a group critically in a really positive, valuable way. This is another great book on the righteous mind by Jonathan Haidt, which I'm gonna reference to you just briefly to encourage you to check it out. It speaks to the ways in which different values give rise to different types of political action. But for the sake of time, I'm going to go on to this encouragement to be for something positive. To be for something positive. Now, we can have a clear-eyed view of what we don't like. That's actually a really good skill. Children spit food out. It's instinctive. From an early age, they realize, But when we think of building a movement, one of the best things that can happen is to outline in a positive vision, in a beautiful way, what it is that you aspire to. What is the good that you want to see around you? What is the thing that says, when Medicine Hat becomes more and more like this? Which is actually one of the things that helps us an antidote against a little bit the nostalgia-driven sense of if only things were things are worse than they used to be. Actually, I'm okay with if only things were the way that they were, if you then outline what that means. People knowing each other, people looking after each other, it being easy to get a job as a 14-year-old and being able to be around people that really cared for you. Whatever the version of the past that you experienced and enjoyed was, find ways to return those things. But again, often within the context of that ladder of engagement, we quickly want to nationalize it. We have a global problem with kids these days. Well, is there anything you can do at the block level or in your neighborhood to be that force of good for your neighborhood, to engage the teen or to engage the student, to engage somebody that you feel is either struggling or somebody that you don't fully understand? And along the way, have a goal. This person that was here, his name's Kerry Westerbeck. He started a group down in Bothell, Washington. And it was a city where they were, as a result of significant housing price pressures, there was some housing, but most of it, or virtually all of it, was unaffordable to people with regular incomes. A lot of people were still at the same time saying, we don't want any more housing because the only new types of housing that we see being built are just too expensive. Now, there's a lot of things, and last night's talk talked a lot more about that. But what Kerry said was, yes, we've got a housing problem, but I actually don't mind the types of projects that I'm seeing around me. And so he posted on the community Facebook page. They have 46,000 members on the community Facebook page in Bothell. And he posted there, he said, I understand some people don't like this, but if anyone kind of doesn't mind what you were seeing here, let's meet up. And they had 15 people show up. Now, actually, the mayor, and they formed a group within a few years. The mayor, who had previously been a part of BOPOP, or Bothell for People-Oriented Places, the mayor got elected with the support of other members of BOPOP. They have planning commissioners, several of the councilors, to the point where actually the group that they had formed is in a dormant stage because all of their core people are so active doing other things that they said, this just works. This resulted in us having a good vision of what we wanted for our community, and it became an attractive vision that it generated electoral success, generated opportunities, but emerged from neighborhoods being considered all the way to the city being considered, and now they're becoming more of a force of even driving for change in Washington State, advocating at the state level for changes on housing based on the good that they're beginning to see in their community. And so this is where the Strong Towns movement more broadly, this is a little bit like, motherhood and apple pie, sort of as a statement, but to me it's very inspirational. The idea of a good life in a prospering place. And when we say prospering, we always mean prospering in the fullest sense of that word, without exempting economic prosperity from it, having economic prosperity that also is complemented by human prosperity, just the sense of being in a good place and living well together. And we feel that when we address many of the things that are standing in the way to that is a noble vision and something that we can be extremely for. I'm 30 minutes in and about 5 or 15 minutes to go, which is about right on time. So one of the things to do is, for example, with Strong Towns, where we often ask people questions that they can apply in their own community. And with that, it gave rise to different types of groups saying, hey, we're going to meet, we're going to discuss these types of things. Groups that are inspired by a positive vision of a livable neighborhood filled with people walking and biking through the removal of of parking mandates, by allowing incremental mixed-use buildings everywhere, by allowing property owners to do with their properties the things that in a normal situation without all of the extra regulations would be allowed, would have been commonplace in societies throughout the history of the world, creating safe, productive streets for everyone. You can almost say, who doesn't want that? But the levels of inertia to block those things from happening require the mobilizing of groups of people to begin to seek these changes. And so discussion together and doing things together is such a key part of that. And so in the last little bit here, I want to touch on the 6 features of successful local groups. From a sample size of, now we have about 860 local conversation groups that are already fully formed or in progress. And the in progress ones are the ones that I'm especially fascinated by, because we have some that have been in progress for several years, where they've not yet met together and done the things necessary to actually spark the change that they want to see in their community. And always probing that question, why do we hold back? Why do I find it difficult at times to just hit print, distribute a flyer, and do something that's pretty fantastic in our neighborhood? It's a lot of these things are insights that emerge from this, as well as academic work. For example, Hari Hahn has a great book, How Organizations Develop Activists, as well as 15 years of seeing failed efforts and successful efforts across the Strong Towns platform, as well as, I mean, more generally in my own personal experience, observing what happens within church groups and different efforts that are made to build ties within communities as well. But one of the key things is always to expand the team, and ideally do so locally, ideally do so in person if you can do it. We have what we call a category of the lone wolf activist, and we actually deliberately don't create many resources for lone wolf activists. Sometimes we'll have people that say, hey, I want to go challenge every last bit of my city's processes. And we'll say, do you have a group? And they'll say no. And we'll say, then start a group. Get other people with you. Half the time, it's just to temper their enthusiasm. We actually are going to be asking our local conversation groups in anticipation of the potential challenges to sign what I'm calling the Don't Be a Jerk agreement. Because we want our local leaders especially to epitomize what it is to be generous in their opinions of others, to be good-spirited in engaging with cities. I love the phrase that somebody just shared with me the other day of a lot of people, especially on perpetually online, younger generations, almost feel the sense we need to tear down the machine, or burn it all down. And it's similar to throwing rocks at a big machine. And the impression was, what if you can actually be within the machine, working within the processes, but pulling out those wires that work different mechanisms that you know to be destructive? What if you can work within the system and refine what it does, rather than trying to simply get rid of it all and leave a blank slate? Blank slates result in dramatic crises. This is historically proven, and this is one of the things that we even know just humanly. These vacuums always get filled, and so we want to figure out, how do we work within existing systems? And part of that is through expanding the team, not doing so as a lone individual. Again, critically, you can have a lot of people agree with you online, but do you have the ability in time, together with people in a place, to come to consensus, to persuade people of your views or be persuaded by theirs? And along with that then is, if you've created something of a team, we always say one of our rules to be on our map of local conversation groups is that you've met with at least 3 people and that you've met at least once together. Now, it's a pretty low bar. And what's awesome about it is that typically they're like, oh yeah, we met, and now we're meeting every week, or every 2 weeks, or every 3, 4. For our group, we meet the 3rd Thursday of the month. So if you're ever in Delta on the 3rd Thursday of the month, come join us for a Del Pop meeting. But what we know is that we want that regularity of meeting together. But then it also gives rise to the fact that people are complex, which means that I may be a member of the Horticulturalist Society. Well, actually, in my case, I'm a member of a local model railroad club. I'm also part of a biking advocacy organization. I belong to a church. I'm involved in a bunch of other different types of things. In those places, I can figure out, is there a way that I can make a connection across, so that not only in my work of advocating on housing, but also into other types of connections, build up those things, be an ambassador of your group among them. Bring your interests at discrete times. I would say don't overdo it. Sometimes I'm a very energetic person, and so I can be overzealous, and my wife is sometimes like, Norm, you're talking too much. That may be one of the checks that we need to have, but oftentimes people will only belatedly realize, oh, I didn't know that you're part of the Downtown Business Collective, or I didn't know that you're part of the Heritage Commission. And it's like, yeah, these are parts of the things that actually have a lot of these bonds together. And what that does is it makes you more and more embedded in your community and a participant in a process, challenged by other people's stances, but also able to contribute in those places as well. In addition to, if you feel like you really need a group to move change in your community, which I would always advocate. This is why we're trying to establish local conversation groups. We have 1,200 people in the last year that have signed up to lead local conversation groups, and that number just keeps growing. 30 or 40 every single week are signing up right now because they're encouraged, they're inspired, they're equipped by different resources that we've shared with them. They like what they see in the Strong Towns approach and vision. They love the idea of a good life in a prospering place and see the barriers that prevent them from getting there. And so part of that process is to expand a team, find their people, but then also make the connections. And then, as I said, to start a local conversation group, Medicine Hat already has this, but this is one of the things, I mean, you don't have to call it a local conversation group if you want to do a rival group or a complementary group, an East Medicine Hat and a West Medicine Hat group. Milwaukee now has 3 groups because they said, we're more interested in this area, we're more interested in this area. We said, that's fantastic. It doesn't have to be citywide. It could be neighborhoods. It can be even, I mean, we haven't had a block one yet, but that could be pretty cool in its own right. But along the way, what this allows you to do is have a reason for meeting together, engaging together, participating together. And just a quick word, probably whenever you're trying to form any kind of an organization, one of the strongest things to do is have a regularity of meeting schedules. To be able to say on a regular basis, we are going to come together, not just haphazardly, not just whenever it comes to mind. This is why scheduling is really valuable, just to say, like, we're going to commit to it. And I'll tell you, maybe you're like me, there's days where I'm like, oh no, we got a meeting tonight, shoot. I show up and then I have a good time and I'm glad that I went. The inertia of my body being in a couch is hard to overcome at times, or in a warm building. That's where the rain's not falling because of our current situation in BC with all of the rain that we get on the Lower Mainland, where the wind's not blowing if you're in Lethbridge, where I grew up. Whatever the affliction here in Medicine Hat, it's not even that cold. So cold is not always the problem. But another key thing that we always encourage groups to do is to do something together. When you do something together, this is something that church groups, and as a pastor, I learned this early on as in my seminary training, learning from other organizations. So learning from people that were doing other things in other sort of settings that were non-religious. The observation was always that when groups do something together, find a way to be of service, it actually deepens one's sense that you have an investment that's made of your time, of your energy, of bringing value to your place. This is an image in Baltimore, for example, where to be able to address the fact that many vehicles were having crashes at this intersection, they said, well, one of the things we could do is make this intersection memorable. So that as people are passing through the neighborhood, all of a sudden they realize, oh, this is a place of high value, and I'm going to be careful. It's one of the reasons why I think that a lot of our school zones could be a lot more colorful, a lot more dynamic, to really vividly show this is a place of activity of vulnerable people or of those that we care about, and we want to take their best interests in mind as we do these things. And so you know that you will feel more invested in galvanized once you've undertaken a project together. We have groups that sweep bike lanes as a commitment where they said the city has told us they don't have the money to do any maintenance of the bike lanes. And because of the way that when vehicles travel, they'll kick up the dust and kick it away from the travel lanes, which is great to keep the streets clean. But it does require every so often street cleaning to clean those gutters. And when you have the bike lanes in the gutter, that means you're getting all sorts of bits of previous crashes. You're getting a bumper every so often, or a mattress, or just bits of clutter, nails if it's come off a construction site, whatever that looks like. And those things don't jive well. I almost got taken out by a mattress once, taking a trail, and all of a sudden, what is that doing there? Somebody had just dropped it into the thing on the side of a bridge, which wasn't great either. So I left it, which is probably not good. I should have gone back and actually removed it. But along the way, what I'm saying is they sweep the bike lanes. They clear leaves from gutters. This is a problem, especially in very rainy areas, or when you have things like flash floods in October, is when the leaves have fallen, your gutters are clogged. one of the best things you can do is just with a foot, pull all the leaves away. Do the things that result in your community not needing to pay a significant repair bill because something's been overwhelmed and a street has been washed out. Whatever those things look like. Painting an intersection, creating iterations of wayfinding signs, providing seating, raising funds to plant trees. A walk audit is a really valuable thing to do. I would love to encourage you to check out what a walk audit is basically with a handful of people, with a clipboard, walk in a place and say, is this place accessible on foot? Is it accessible in a wheelchair? Does it meet the needs of a young father or mother pushing a stroller? Does this place work as a place where an elderly person is able to walk with dignity in their area? And is there room, for example, for scooters to go whizzing by? Or are you going to create situations where there's a close call? Are there situations where intersections are so obscured that it's actually really difficult to know if anybody is coming, and you take people's lives into your own hands when you try to cross that? Doing something together can be really valuable, and a walk audit is a great way to just get to know your community as well. This was one of the consequences of a lot of people spending more time in their neighborhoods because international travel was restricted and people were working from home, is that a lot more people were walking out together. And we have tons of Strong Towns members that are like, hey, I live a regular lifestyle from a North American perspective, but I've been walking a lot more, and I noticed that many things that I never noticed from behind my windshield are standing out to me now that I'm on foot. And so I try to walk more, and I try to take note of these things. And I've started a local conversation group because I want to get more people to notice these things and care about these things. And so doing those things together, our group, we host walking tours every so often, and doing all of these things really creates a deeper sense of understanding. Another core thing is, this is the don't be a jerk thing, but also is to be very thoughtful in the way that we communicate. The rule for criticism that we teach is always never attack people, but attack actions. Also, don't assign to malice the things that can be attributed to incompetence. Also, don't try to read and assume that you know what other people's intentions are. Another rule that we encourage our groups in, and this is, again, this is part of just being human, this is part of being kind and being generous, is not jumping to conclusions that are not justified by the evidence. And this can be challenging because sometimes we're convinced that somebody in a vehicle has swerved because they're trying to get us, or they're trying to throw off our day. When it may be that they just dropped something and erroneously did something. How many times through a windshield do we feel as we're driving very deeply offended that somebody has done something when it may have been rather unknown? For example, when I was in grade 1, we had a school choir concert, and in a moment, in a flash, because this is the way that our brains work, I became really annoyed with Michelle, who was standing next to me, because she was leaning into me. So I was like, what are you doing? And as I went like this, she slammed down onto the risers because she had fainted from the heat. Turns out I was really, really wrong in assuming that she was like elbowing me or trying to get my attention. No, she was fainting. And so sometimes we have groups that jump the gun, release a public letter, and then we're like, oh, no, you didn't get it right. Work at those types of things, and especially when we attack people, it becomes so difficult to bring that back in. Our wounds linger on. Sticks and stones do break bones, but words definitely hurt people as well. Celebrate success. This is the sixth and last key feature. It's good to have a positive vision. It's also good when you see anything good that's happening and celebrate that. If you're writing a letter to council, or you're writing a letter to city staff, you're writing a letter to the editor, do you have time? Do you have some word count to be able to say, we love, or I love this, or I noticed that this has happened and this makes me happy, even though this is not so good? It's amazing the types of doors that open when you begin with just a spoonful of sugar, a little bit of grace, a little bit of generosity, but also for a group. If you've gotten to this point, you formed a group. I always say, this is a story from Chuck Marone, the founder of Strong Towns. He said when he started out, people would ask him, hey, can you come talk to us? You, the individual, come talk to us, a group. And he began referring to the Strong Towns movement, and he would say, we are doing this and we are doing that. And then one time somebody said, is there a we or is it just you? Great question, great critical question. And he said, I am convinced it is we because I meet so many people, but truth be told, I don't fully know. Then they held a meetup. And they said, let's have a meetup. I think it was in Milwaukee. And they had 150 people show up who took time out of their days, drove up, and he's like, okay, yeah, we're definitely a we. And now we have 5,200 members, but we have thousands and thousands more that are passionate about these things. And so in the same way at the local level, to say, like, if it's just you and 3 other people, that's a we, and we've done this, and we're achieving these things, and to find ways to encourage one another with that as well. Oh, sorry, my 6th one, try to engage with your public officials. Start small, share an article, and be helpful when need arises. Introduce yourself and others. It can be really valuable. And this is, I see our director of their chamber here as well. These other organizations, chambers, and other groups like this are also great groups to connect with, to encourage, to say, keep up what you're doing, as well as saying, here's the things that I'm observing. These are the needs that we are experiencing. And when you introduce yourself, sometimes I found it can be really valuable to say, I'd like to have coffee with you, and if it's okay, I'm going to bring along 2 other people. They almost always say yes because it's 3 times as efficient a use of their time. And so if you're a busy person, which we all feel we are, it is really valuable to say, I'm going to not only take time for you to meet me, which is a great interaction opportunity, but also a couple more people. And next time you see them in the community, you have a 3 times more likelihood chance of meeting the person that you met once in this type of a setting. Ask with interest, what do you do in the city? What do you do within the community? What do you value? We have elections 4 times a year, or 4 times a year. That would be chaotic. Every 4 years or 5 years, depending on your cycles. But those are opportunities for public officials to say what they have done, what they value, what they want to do. But are we having the opportunities across different time zones, or time periods rather, to ask, how's it going? Where are we seeing progress? How is your vision for what you wanted as a community, as an outside a non-incumbent person? How has it shifted now that you're at the table, that you're participating in these types of discussions? Because you may learn from them a model of political engagement, a model of learning on the fly, a model of quickly breaking down complex information that may help you to one day either run for office or support someone that does. In time, so I would say start small. But then in time, like where our group has gotten, where other groups are gotten, we host civic learning opportunities. We brought in a speaker from Toronto, Grayson Johnson, to speak in our community about unleashing more small-scale development. We actually did a walking tour to show, like in Delta, we've got great examples of small duplexes and apartments and other things like that that used to be legal and became illegal because of our suburban design standards. And yet now we need them more than ever in our community. And so we had city leaders, we had planners, we had realtors, we had regular members of the public. We had a couple of people that were very skeptical. And by the end, they were like, this was way different than I expected and really valuable. We've hosted walking tours, which I put a couple asterisks beside because they're fantastic. You can host a debate. You can bring in a forum, all sorts of these different types of things. And it won't always be 500 people in the theater, but that's because the scale is always one of working up, getting to that point. We brought in Chuck Marone last year. We brought in Grayson this year. But those were big reaches for our little group, especially our core group of leaders, to be able to host it. And yet, we're so glad that we did, and it helped to build momentum. But it took us several years to get there. And that's what I want to leave you with as well, is that it takes time. It takes that patience, a little bit of that stubbornness to be scrappy. We use cell phones to record everything. It's pretty janky, and yet it kind of works. And it creates a really valuable thing within the community as well. And so having multiple leaders, being connected to a broader network over time, doing things together, deliberately focusing on issues, celebrating successes together, and offering value as a generous partner for local officials. And I'll close this because this is a core conviction that we've shared a lot in our encouragement of Strong Towns advocates, is that if you love your place, it will love you back. And it seems hokey, almost, okay, thanks, Norm. That's a nice Chinese fortune cookie slip. But no, the truth is there's something really powerful here that when we become aware of our needs and burdens in our community, sometimes we become distrustful of our leaders. We become concerned about what it's become. We really wrestle. How do I love a place that's become like this? But if we commit deep down to doing this, it will help you to mobilize your community to become whatever it is that your vision of your community is, to become a strong town, to become a great town, to become an immense, immaculate town, whatever your vision is, you will do this. But as you love your place, as you invest in your place, it will love you back. I feel this, I know this from so many other stories that I hear. People that said, we intended to leave, and now we can't. Not because we can't afford to leave, but because we don't want to. This is where we belong. This is our place. And so thank you so much. We'll take some time for questions if you want to talk about public engagement and how to do this process, or we want to touch on the Strong Towns portion of it as well. But thank you so much for your attention this afternoon.
I'd like to make just a comment, I guess. I'm learning through the process. I went to university and studied business administration.
Yeah.
And through the process, what I've learned is that I might be shocked at the statistics that are being shared if it wasn't so logical.
Right.
Right? And if you have ever written a business plan, and you want to go to the bank and you want to ask for some money, they're going to ask for a business plan.
Yeah.
It's not good enough to just show them what I have in my bank account right now, what my idea is and what I hope to do. Like, they want actual information and they want projections.
Yeah.
And if one thing costs one thing today, it's not going to cost that next year.
Right.
Right? So it's not good enough to have it today. It's not good enough to just have a 1-year projection. But it's important to have 5, 10, 15, 20-year projections. And I work with a financial advisor, and when we're discussing investments and stuff, we're always looking down, like you said, piecemeal, a bunch of different investments, so that you kind of diversify your projections. So I've been in a leadership position for many years, and I recognize that we all struggle in life. Life is hard. We have relationship challenges, we have financial challenges, we have children challenges. There's so many challenges that affect us on a daily basis. Yeah. And it's not a federal government thing, it's not a provincial government thing, it's a city thing. Yeah. And as a leader, I try and encourage my staff to empower themselves. I try to empower them. I try and encourage them to learn that no matter what we learn or understand right now, we can always understand something more. Yeah. So that continuing learning piece. And I had a lot of hope in Medicine Hat, but to be honest, I'm feeling very jaded right now. I feel like we have an opportunity to learn from examples, real examples, where people have done certain things and it hasn't worked out. And it makes me feel jaded when I see, we all have an opinion of political people. Usually it's not so good, right? That's a politician. Yeah. But the city workers work hard. They go to work and they do their best. They go to school and they work real hard. They gain experience and they try and share that experience to these elected officials. Yeah. And there's nothing more disheartening when I see these elected officials try and take a faux political stand, faux anger, and up and leave during these information sessions. And then to see the most senior of leadership within the administration up and leave with them, as though they're connected with that politician. I want to see my my public servants working hard for us and not being politicals without being elected. If they want to be a political, then they should run for election. But when they're working within the administration, do your job and continue that learning and take notes, right? Yeah. Because our opinions can grow over time. Yeah. I know I've been long-winded here, but I feel like Medicine Hat can be better. But I also feel that the most senior of leadership in Medicine Hat has to stop and start taking some notes, because I don't feel at all comfortable with the direction. So I go to work and I encourage my staff, and I'm trying to stay positive, but yet they're giving us these blatant examples that they're not on board with us.
Sounds like there's a lot of context or a backstory there that I want to learn about. And so certainly my email is norm@strongtowns. If you want to share some of the, I don't know if it's been written up or if there's just like observations that you have, certainly do share that. Because there's such an interesting way in which we can encounter these setbacks or these, you say where you feel jaded, you feel unheard, is one of those places this is the ladder of engagement side. If you feel that you're not being heard by higher officials or higher people with other certain portfolios, one of the opportunities that you have is to develop that movement that then says, we'd like to meet, but with a larger group. One of the encouragements we also give to our groups is try to bring down the temperature, bring down the stakes, rather than saying, all right, like here's the ultimatum or this is the moment. Like we know that our cities are, gradually finding their feet, gradually finding their form. And it's a process of many hands participating in that process. And so I sometimes worry we've got some, radical people in our movement that are like, all right, let's, we had a situation in the folks from Sioux Center, Iowa won't watch this. So there was an interest in the Sioux Center, Iowa. They said, we're interested in the Community Action Lab. Can you at least share what this is? And the city manager wanted to meet with us. Then turns out a member of the community that's like the Strong Towns guy blasted mayor and council and the city manager as incompetent and all of these things. Guess what? That opportunity that he actually would have wanted was canceled. And they were like, we're not doing, thanks, but no thanks. We're going to carry on in our own way. And so that was for me a moment where I was like, how did that, we had a good relationship. All of a sudden it was like, I would do the exact same thing if I was the city manager. I'd be like, I don't want anything to do with that. I had to deal with that as a pastor all the time where I was like, you said what to what? Sometimes you create those troubles that then linger and sort of fester for a long time. How do communities get an opportunity to speak into what's happening in their neighborhood, into public policy, into those types of things? It is really challenging to sift through a lot of public comment, but it's valuable for that comment to be there, to be provided, and to be provided on a consistent basis. But we encounter it, and perhaps you've had this experience where somebody's like, hey, did you hear that this type of a policy is being considered? That one bird telling another bird what's happening in the neighborhood is so valuable, because oftentimes we'll have somebody speak at a public hearing and they'll be like, how come I didn't know about this? You've been working on this for 16 months and this is the first time that we hear about it. And then you'll have the city staffer that says, well, we had a public engagement session here. And one of those things, the response will often be, well, I don't have time to track everything that the city is doing. But now that I am keyed in on this issue, I want my opportunity to be heard and in a sense, not to be discounted. And I think one of the valuable things of being part of these more loose associations and groups like this is that somebody will be like, hey, we should probably attend one of these sessions. And if you want, I can bring the letter for you, or I can bring your input as well. And I think that's sometimes the really healthy organs of a city are when they're getting a lot of early input. In Kamloops, British Columbia, there's a young guy, he's an organizing dynamo, leading the group there. One of the things that he's been doing is he goes up to any property, he learns who the property owner is of any site that is being underused. They're a Bank of Montreal, own the bank building. Turns out banks are trying to get out of the business of owning their own buildings and they just want to lease so they have more fluidity and be able to move more quickly. But this bank they still own. Said, what are you going to do with it? They said, we don't know. He said, I have some ideas. They said, what do you mean? He said, I would love to be able to get a group of people from our neighborhood together. We're going to go in together to City Hall. And whether you become the developer as the bank branch manager or you work with another partner, we're going to go in together and sort of have our general list of what we want to see. All of a sudden, the planner who was on the file that heard that there was something happening with this property was like, oh, I wasn't expecting the people that normally we have to notify at the end of the process, who then are like, wait, how was I not engaged in this process earlier? Instead, they're bringing it up front. Now, that is challenging, and that's actually mainly in the private sector. A lot more of that could be happening. How many property owners that just want to push a project until they get it to the public hearing and then let the public have their chance to, in a sense, have their say. And oftentimes it's a decent project, good enough, but the changes that would make it a great project are too late in the process. And so one of the other pieces that I always say from a political perspective is engage earlier if you can. But it takes energy, it takes time, it means setbacks, it means those points where they're like, sorry, the official period for public comment hasn't begun yet. You're like, okay, I'll check back later. Or I'll just send an email to the councilor anyways. Just be like, by the way, I heard that this might be happening. I'm not saying, I'm not firmly against it, or I'm willing to wait and listen, but let them know that you're tracking it. Let them know that you're interested in it. That can be valuable. And again, I would say too, be as gentle and gracious and encouraging to your city council members and others, even as you're preparing to endorse their opponents. Not in a duplicitous way, but just to say, I want good relations with you, even if I think somebody else could do that position more effectively. And you will be given the opportunity to vote at the right time for the person, and it doesn't matter how close of a relationship you have. If it's your mother, you probably should vote for her. But everybody else, you have the opportunity to say, I've made a discerning decision to select someone else, but I am glad that they've served as a public official, even if I'm dissatisfied with some of the policies that they were in favor of or some of the actions that they took. I was a preacher, so I had opportunities to preach for 45 minutes. So anytime an opportunity like this comes up, great question. I appreciate the comment. I'd be happy to have you share later what the some of the pain points or the friction points have been that you've observed. Other thoughts or questions?
I think that
Yeah.
I think the picture of Medicine Hat, I've come back here and I decided that I live in Redcliffe now, but we come back here because of the city itself and the history of the city. And I think that, last night they touched upon, for example, the flats. And I think that what we need is almost to have poster child people in each area talking about what the rich history is about the flats, about Crescent Heights, about the Southeast Hill, previous alumni that might have lived there. And I feel like we don't hold space for people. We talk about getting together and listening to people, but we don't really hold that space. So if I come and I'm angry, just to get it out, just to hold space for them, you might not agree with what I have to say or anything, but I think that's really important. I think these conversations would be wonderful.
Yeah.
We talked about those block parties. When I was in Regina, the police, we had those too. We did through SEPTED, which is crime prevention through environmental design. We did those too, and we got to know our neighbors and talk about things. And, and I think that that's important and that's really key.
Yeah. 100%. And allowing for anger to be a genuine emotion is one of the most challenging things. Our immediate, we're risk averse and we become very accustomed to it. It's sort of we have a family near us that is a very loud household, and there's plenty of children yelling at parents and parents yelling at children. And I'm always like, oh, I wish. But then you go talk to them and they're actually just fine. Like the psychologist, I'm always like, are they going to be fine? Like how much therapy will they need? But actually in their setting, they seem to genuinely love each other. They're just loud, passionate in these types of ways. And it's fascinating to see in other settings, and this is some of that cultural awareness too, like what does it mean to say like, I don't like this, or this isn't good enough. In some cultures that can be like, you've just like really stomped on somebody's position. In other situations, it's like, oh yeah, that's just what we say, at the dinner table. And so I think learning those things certainly helps. If you see a public official sputtering, it's probably because they're trying to figure out how to respond well. It's not necessarily that they have, all of the answers immediately right there. But I think the idea of making that space, anger is the hardest one. Sadness is one that we can often, I often find if we can share some of the things that cause us to be sad, to be weary. Those are the types of things that are personal experiences that a lot of people can relate to, even if they don't understand the symptoms or they don't understand like, oh, so you are like burdened by the fact that children aren't playing outside these days. Well, if you say, I'm angry that they're not, you're like, well, what are you going to do? Force them out? But if you just say, with a sense, there's a sadness, or I observe these types of things, that's a really valuable type of input. And yeah, it doesn't immediately change the needle or move the needle, but it does inform situations where there's an urge or an encouragement. Can we perhaps consider lowering some of the residential neighborhoods' speed limits, as well as doing some minor modifications of the street designs in order to allow for the types of things that naturally, in the built environment, slow down vehicles within existing neighborhoods, not on the highways, not on the major roads, but doing so to create more safe neighborhoods. And when that can happen, you actually get back to the situations where, back in the 70s and the 60s, most households had one vehicle. Now, most households have 2 to 3. That's a massive increase in the amount of traffic that each of those streets is expected to manage. which then requires us to be able to say, can we adapt in other ways to higher traffic volume, higher types of inputs that are happening in our community? One option is to open up the throttle and allow it to be faster, wider, more nimble. The other option is to say, maybe within existing neighborhoods, we take steps to improve public safety, to improve the well-being of people, to make it more desirable a place to live. I often encourage people at least drive the speed limit in your neighborhood because it increases your property value. If your neighborhood is consistently the place where people are doing 70 or 80 kilometers as they blaze through it, that becomes part of the character and the narrative of your community. And so create a little neighborhood pace car bumper sticker and just say, I'm doing my bit to be a neighborhood pace car. I'm just at the max of what the speed is allowed in a neighborhood, or maybe even a little slower, and just encourage a community to grow and develop that way. But yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, quick, easy question.
Yeah.
Strong Towns,
Yeah.
it's a change organization. It helps make changes in places. And usually as part of the change process, I always thought of it as there's 4 phases of change. There's storming, where people are angry and fight each other and get mad at each other's ideas. There's forming, where you're starting to pay attention to other people's ideas. There's normalizing, where you're starting to actually get a plan together and you're performing. Those are the typical phases of change. Where do you see Strong Towns is at right now with respect to Medicine Hat? It sounds a little bit like we're still in the storming phase. Or are we starting to get to the forming phase?
It's a really interesting way of framing sort of stages of change and development. Yeah.
I love hearing people being angry and talking. So at least it's coming out.
Yeah.
That's a good thing in some ways, that you're actually they're vocalizing.
Yeah. I mean, my sense, I mean, having been here in July, having been here in person now again, but also just, we're observing in different like Facebook groups and different things like that, just be like, okay, what is the conversation like? There's broadly a sense of what are the elements that we want to see forming in certain neighborhoods and certain places, while other parts of the city residents have been open to say, I don't think we like this, or I don't think this is a valuable way for our neighborhood to, for example, allow more accessory dwelling units or backyard cottages to take place. Many people in Medicine Hat have said, we don't really have a housing crisis because many people are housed. And we've always historically had homeless populations. And so, and then you'll have the pushback and you'll have some of that. So that may be, I guess I do wonder if you ever get to the stage where there is no storming. Like it feels like there's always sort of remnants of each stage as that change is occurring. But another way to think about it is like, is there a paradigm that is shifting where, going back in science, for example, you have Galileo putting out new scientific theories, but it takes a whole process until all of a sudden it just locked in. And many people are like, oh, well, yeah, of course, I've always, you're like, not that long ago, you thought that this was crazy. And now you think, oh, no, this is just normal. This is just part of it. Small things, for example, there was a question of, why in the downtown have they put up these little traffic I call them car ticklers, but these little bollard things to basically be able to shorten the crossing distance for pedestrians or for those that are in wheelchairs, to be able to make them make somebody who is waiting to cross the street a lot more visible because they can step out a little ways further without feeling like their toes are going to be run over. And what that does is the question was raised, why do we have this? I don't see, can anybody explain why this was done? And it was interesting to read some of the comments because some people said they're just throwing money, out the door. Others were saying, actually, there's good practices behind this. Let's see if this is valued. Let's see if this has valuable, for example, is valuable in our school zones. Is this one of the ways, instead of installing speed bumps that only make cars go up and down, is there any way that we can actually narrow this crossing distance for our most vulnerable users? Different things like that. So, and probably even more importantly than sort of what my take on it is, or of our team, is a sense within the community to share with your elected leaders in this project, but also more generally is, where are you at? You probably have a better read of your room than I'm able to, but while recognizing then we're often like unaware of certain pockets of folks that are having very different priorities and wanting to pursue very different paths. And I think sometimes that work of synthesis can be really valuable. But within it, we have just seen shifts on housing to allow up to 4 units per lot across the province of British Columbia. So that every lot is now eligible to at least have lots of different housing choices within each property. So that many people can say, I don't want anything to do with this new housing stuff, and that's totally fine. They don't have to change anything about their property, but they now cannot prevent a neighbor from being able to add a few more units for a mother-in-law, for a renter, or for someone else. A lot of people, that was unthinkable just 5-6 years ago. And it's really shifted. And now, on housing, for example, all 3 of our major national parties and the Bloc Québécois all campaigned on providing more housing and removing some of the current restrictions that exist. That's a new political paradigm that from the top down, we're very critical of the way in which, federal actions to just throw a lot of money at things. $227 million in Calgary to create 36,000 homes is actually only $6,000 per new home created, which raises the question, what are you going to do with that money? And no, I don't want to get sidetracked into a federal political discussion, but it is one of those things that, like, on the one hand, we get these big announcements for grand strategies, but a lot of the work has to happen at the local level and only happens at the local level and can be enabled by that. Other thoughts? And maybe I shouldn't have gone into federal policy, but I couldn't resist. It's fascinating. On the one hand, we're optimistic as we take steps to address these things, but sometimes the method can be challenging to manage the outcomes, or just very efforts made to subsidize something, but it's such a nominal subsidy that it barely moves the needle, or different types of changes. That's where I think different efforts to say, can we use this money in a very targeted way, can be very valuable as well. So, and I think the Housing Accelerator Fund application here in Medicine Hat, I think details are emerging about that, or it should be coming out, or I think they are already out. We read in the paper that it's been awarded. So, but I think they're still working with the federal government to figure out, like, what does that look like? What are the terms of that agreement? Ask about it. Sean, who was just here in planning, would be happy to share whatever information that they do have that's available. The plans are, as they're being made, until they're poured in concrete, there's opportunities to change them. And once they're poured in concrete, you have the opportunity to critique them, to share them, to say, if we've done this, can we do this further? Can we take this other step? I often think that, a lot of our cities could do well to say, hey, we're in the wet concrete stage, so let's make sure that we get this right, that we finish it properly, and then we prepare for the next pour, the next round, the next stage that we take. So, back to you. Mm-hmm. No, you're good.
On the stages that he was just sharing, this year we saw numerous city employees get released in the name of budget constraints. We've also seen a 4% increase to our taxes. So again, budgetary constraints. So we're letting go. People are wanting more money from us. So I feel like this would be like the perfect time to take on a strategic planning plan for the future, as opposed to doubling down on the things that history has shown us causes more debt down the line. I think we're at crossroads, and I don't think that right now we're taking the right path.
Okay.
So in sharing like with this stage, I think we are at a crossroads. But
the strategic planning process sometimes has on the one hand, we do want to plan ahead, we do want to have visions, but those need to be very loosely held. For example, what will oil prices be in 5, 10, 15, and 20 years? Because that has a huge impact on the local economy. So, tied in with that is, will interest rates peak? Will they rise? Or will they suddenly fall? Housing, there's many of those types of variables, which, you would certainly know, are baked into strategic planning. You try to bake in all those variables, but pretty quickly you come to the point where your predictions are quite difficult to make. But then that's where, what are the values that we want to have as a community? What are the things that we want to provide to each other really can have a big impact. I told my friend at the camera that I would go for about an hour, which does mean that we're about 18 minutes past. I hope we're okay. Why don't we wrap up there and we can take time for further conversation afterwards as well. But thank you so much for attending. I hope that this is of value. And for those that are watching this afterwards, thank you for your attentiveness as well as participating in what the community is doing. And thank you. I hope you have a great day. Keep doing what you can to build either a strong town in Medicine Hat or the closest thing to it. So thank you so much.